So in terms of welcome back, this is part 4. If we look, review the course aims, it's understand contract strategy terminology, focusing on the NEC family of contracts. And we've gone from the big picture and the conceptual, if you like, down to members of the family, down to which main payment option, and we're effectively finishing that off today and starting on the secondary options of the NEC, much of which, or many of those secondary options, not all by any means, are common to other forms of contract. So although we won't talk about it today, but if I talk about damages, a lot of the principles, etc., will be common under whatever family you're talking about. And the whole idea is that you can intelligently contribute to setting up of a contract strategy much more intelligently than before. So in terms of where we are on the program, we did this. We're finishing off the above. So we're looking at the management contracts in terms of contract strategy options, which is a sort of bit of extra onto the main engineering construction contract. It is one of the main payment options, option F, but there's another alternative. And then we're going to start reviewing the secondary options, including the relevant contract data entries. And if we get through what I hope to get through today, we should be on course to finish off without rushing too much in the last session. So today's agenda: startups, objectives, generals, some Q&As, which I got by email. So thank you very much for that. Then look at those management contracts, a little bit of revision in terms of finishing off what we've covered so far. We're then going to look at dispute resolution options, the W options under NEC, and then we're going to look at the incentive related clauses and step outside the NEC family and considerations for incentive plan design, which are increasingly becoming more popular. So as you can read the ground rules, same as before, sound off just as a reminder, because it's distracting if we get feedback or conversations in the background. But do ask questions, and no one's got their camera on, but I think you know I like it, but equally not many people turn them on. So anyway, I'll have blobs to look at this week, it seems. So got these three questions actually. One was lecture 2 didn't seem to cover a separate design and build contract in the NEC suite of contracts. Is this covered by the contractor's design clauses in the standard NEC4 Engineering and Construction contract? I know design, build and operate is something different. And so the reason I'm covering these is if one person's asking it, some other people probably have this in the back of their mind. So the answer is yes. Under Engineering and Construction contract clause 21, it allows any extent of contract design from here's a performance spec, go away and build it, through to completely designed by the client to be put into the contract. So it's not binary, it's not design and build or fully designed, it's anywhere in between. The really important thing if you're a designer is you have to include a statement of what the contractor is to design, what they've got to finish off, because if it's not in there, then it's not in the scope, and therefore the scope will need to be changed, and that will be a compensation event. Okay, and that could just be a general statement that any outstanding design is to be completed by the contractor. It could be that general, but you need something in there. I would suggest it's more precise than that, perhaps a catch-all phrase, but then a lot more precise than that. For various reasons. In lecture 2, there was a question in the chat about, can you please define what is a back-to-back contract is? I thought I addressed it, but I'll go over again. I assume it means that they match each other. So if the contractor uses any NEC engineering construction contract at main contract level, they can give work to a subcontractor using the ECS. I just want to check that assumption is correct, and that assumption is correct. It is under near identical terms. So near identical terms in terms of the conditions of contract. The timescales change, so communications can go down, line the back up. Scope, same or much more restricted because it's subcontracting. So it has to pick out the elements from the main contract scope and effectively say, this is your scope under the subcontract. So the scope will be severely cut down, if you like, in terms of words in each. Yeah. Okay, so risk allocation is near identical in terms of words in each condition of contract, but it applies to a lot less. And when I say, well, yeah, no, that's a bit too detailed. There was also another question about social value and how you incorporate that, but we'll talk about that when we look at relevant secondary option X clauses to do with incentivization. Okay, so we touched on that, but didn't look as, or touched on secondary options to do with incentivization, but we'll look at it a lot more this time. So with that, unless there's any further questions, which people can type up now if they want to. I can't see anything appearing, but do it, and I will come back to it if I can. We will get on to management contracts, which was the bit I'd optimistically hoped to look at last week, but we got to 10.2 and I thought, no, there's no way I can start this and finish it. So what are they? So they, plural, there are a number of arrangements. There are arrangements where the contractor, so a party who normally delivers the physical works, is employed as a professional because of its management expertise. All right. So they do very little, if any, physical work which is let to specialist subcontractors. So you're employing them for the management capability, not for any physical capabilities they have. Normally, those subcontract packages are let, so it should be subcontract, or no, specialist packages are let on price-based routes, but not entirely. I do know of ones where target cost contracts routes have been used, and occasionally cost reimbursable, pure cost reimbursable routes, because it's really important that this package is done quickly, with the designers either contracted direct to the client or to the contractor. So that varies. Okay. So there are two, when are they used? Well, when there are numerous contract interfaces. So the coordination of them is critical. So perhaps that is contractual interfaces, which under a normal contract, the contractor would not be willing to take on. All right. So that might be without, not specialist subcontractors, but I don't know, statutory undertakers, perhaps for big service diversions. I don't know, and other things. The client does not have sufficient expertise or resource to manage the above. So they could have the expertise, but they don't have the numbers of people, and this is a big project for them. All right. So they need to hire in external capacity, if you like, in which case the client still retains the decision-making authority under those contracts, but is advised by the construction manager, or they don't have the resources, or they don't have the expertise. So it's a big project and we only do a little bit of building, minor or minor construction, right? And we just don't have the expertise for a project of that magnitude or complexity. And the other one is, and notice there's an and or, the project is time driven, with the client unable to express exactly what is wanted with sufficient precision at the time of starting construction. So at one point, management contracts were extremely popular in the City of London. Almost every city office block you saw being built was done under this route. This was in the late 80s. And the reason was time to market. There just wasn't enough office space. So the sooner you could get an office space up and running, the better, the sooner you could get return on your capital employed. And therefore you'd start the building as soon as possible in order to finish it as soon as possible, and therefore start getting the rents in. What's the advantage of them? Early contractor input into the design and programming. So if you're employing a contractor for their construction expertise, they can put that into the buildability aspects, the programming aspects. It also means that each contract package, as in the actual physical contract package, can be tailored to that that package's circumstance. So what would normally be done by a subcontractor, you can tailor it to that requirement and therefore pass less risk on to the supply chain. So an alternative to a management contract would be arguably a design and build contract. But that would mean that you'd have to express the requirement in sufficient detail to know what you're going to get. And then the contractor, if you've got a very tight timescale, then has to say, well, I might muck it up. I've got to allow a lot of risk for this. I'll have to allow potentially for rework under my specialist packages, etc. All that risk would be passed on to the design and build contractor, who would pass it down the supply chain. So you'd almost get double risk, if you like. So the idea is the client, if you like, is taking that risk, that interface risk, and that over design risk. But the disadvantages are likely to be some over design of early packages, likely to be some rework in the early packages, as in we built it like this on the belief that this was going to happen, and actually the design's changed or something like that. No price certainty at the start of construction. So, you know, it is based on estimates for these specialist packages, and they might come in significantly more expensive or less, you know. Potential for duplication of roles. So what you can have is the client is the decision-making head of the management organization, but the construction manager runs it. So, but people learn that if they go straight to the client, they can overrule or whatever the construction manager's recommendation. Or alternatively, the client organisation starts checking up on the management contracting organisation to make sure they're competent. So you have two levels of bureaucracy. Essentially, the benefits need to justify the increased management costs. So the benefits, normally the speed to market, need to justify the increased management cost. So I've talked a bit high level about it. What's it actually? What are there two types of contract? There's the management contract, which is option F of the engineering construction contract. And effectively, it's a cost reimbursable with the presumption that the contractor will do no physical work. It will all be subcontracted out, the physical work. That's the starting point for it. Now, in NEC option F, what you can do is you can say to the contractor, give me a lump sum for the elements which you will do yourself. All right, and I'll just pay you that. All right. The other key difference between a cost reimbursable contract under option E of the engineering construction contract and a option F is that all the contractor's own costs, so their management costs, if you like, are presumed to be within the fee percentage. So the management contractor is paid what they pay their subcontractors in accordance with those subcontracts. Any lump sums for things they're doing themselves, which they've oiked out, and they've oiked them out effectively of that fee percentage, and that fee percentage which is applied to those two items, the lump sums and what they pay the specialist subcontractors, covers all the contractor's internal costs. Where under option E, those internal site-based costs are paid directly, and the fee is for external costs and profit. The other route is construction management, and that's where the contractor, small c, is employed as a consultant, and under NEC that would be under a professional services contract, presumably, to manage the design and physical work. So what does that look like contractually and in organisationally? So here we have the management contracting approach. We have the client here. This would be option, the black is the contractual links. This would be option F of the engineering construction contract. And the works contractors are below the main contract or subcontracted to them, and then any communications go through the management contractor, or should do. And the designer might be contracted to the client. I think more commonly they'd probably be contracted to the management contractor, and we can see that the communication routes. The construction management route, we've got the client, and the contracts are with the client. Okay, so the first contractors down here and the designer, and it is the construction manager who is managing them and communicating with them. One of the big dangers, and this was really evident on the Scottish Parliament years ago, apparently one of the reasons why it did so badly was if you've got an inexperienced client organisation who think that they should be in charge, politicians, yeah, who start not following the communications protocols, the works contractors start going direct to them saying, what do I do? Ignoring them and almost sidelining the construction managers. The other danger is that the client doesn't get involved but starts going, well, actually, I want to keep tabs on you to make sure you're managing this properly, and you get an extra layer of bureaucracy on these people, if you like. The client's managing the construction manager who's managing the works. And likewise, that can happen here, where this is the management contractor, in theory, in concept, is employed as a professional, but there's a contractual bit here, so the client's managing them again when they're meant to be managing that. So you have two layers of management. So disadvantage of the first route is this, one was found in practice. The contractor was nominally appointed as a professional, but it's got a contract in place, and these are time-driven projects. Developers in the City of London want their building built fast, and if it's not built to time, there are big damages on the developer, so they pass them down to the management contractor. The management contractor therefore now has a commercial situation to defend. So when a change happens, rather than saying, okay, how do we deal with this to meet the original deadline, the tendency to go was, whoa, I need some extra time because this delays me. So there was a conflict created between that supposedly professional role and the contractual incentive, if you like, of having damages and the need to defend their position. And then the other thing, I've done that first, actually, is they passed the risk down the contractual chain. So you had instances of sort of £60,000 subcontract packages which are on the critical path, and they have the full damages for the whole project of £10,000 a day or something like that on them. So what that means is that they can, because effectively the main contractor's getting reimbursed what they pay their subcontractors, they don't care almost if the subcontract includes loads of risk amount for these potential damages in their subcontract packages. They just pass it down, yeah. And therefore the client pays that almost double bubble for the risk, yeah. Once for the management contractor, where they're including an allowance for damages in their fee, and once again for those specialist contractors. So there was a move. So I did say in the late 80s, management contracting, virtually every office block in London seemed to be under management contracting. I spent my summer working on one of those buildings. So what happened was construction management came in. And here the contractor as is given a pure professional role. There's not a contract position apart from exercising reasonable skill and care as a professional to defend. And those direct contracts with specialists and designers speed up payment. That means that less risk is passed down to the supply chain, better value is in those specialist contracts, etc., and so on. So that sort of replaced those, or the management contracting route. But there are disadvantages which I've alluded to. So direct contract with specialists and designers, especially with inexperienced clients, mean that communication paths can become unclear. If roles and responsibilities are not defined, and even if they are defined, they are not adhered to. And as I said, the Scottish Parliament, that was apparently one of the downfalls of the project. Effectively, the construction manager ceased to be able to manage. They also had an inexperienced client who they were saying, what do you want to do? And they were political decisions were made, if you like. And that wasn't good. If we swing back to the advantage of management contracting, well, the contractor has more of a fitness for purpose liability, a greater to incentive to perform, but the client has to state the purpose at the start, not change it, or give enough of a scope, not change it, and adopt a more hands-off approach. If there's lots of change, you're going to get into arguments because the contractor has a commercial position to defend. Okay, so where management contracting, I think, is still useful is where you have defined the project. It might be time dominated, but the project is sufficiently mature for you to hand it over to a management contractor, and you're not going to change it. And you're happy to pay a bit more for those subcontract packages. And that might be because you recognize you don't have the capability and particularly the capability to actually manage it under construction management. Last one we'll mention is a development of the construction management approach, and it's the delivery partner model. And effectively, the client says, I have this big project, the Olympics. I can't remember what my budget is, but it includes loads for risk amounts. I will pay you as a construction manager to manage and coordinate the interfaces between all these construction contracts and design contracts potentially. But any savings you make on from that risk pot from a budget somewhere, shall we say, you get a share of. So it's a heavily incentivized construction and management approach. So that's that. So before we move on, any questions on construction management, design management, delivery partner management contracting? Stunned silence. Nope. Thank you for whoever said no. All right. Okay. Let's move. So here's my little bit, or start of my little bit of a revision. So we'll fill this in as a quick reminder. So this is one of the earlier slides. So for term services contracts, where you are reactively saying just do this, you might use the NEC4 term services short contract. Where you are instructing them though, or where there's, if I go on to this, they haven't arisen in order, where you are more saying, I want you to maintain an asset, I want you to maintain an asset either on a condition-based approach, or I want you to do these things regularly. Once a year, I want you to clean out the gutters. Yeah, that lends itself to strategic outsourcing, and therefore probably the term services contract in the NEC family. If you want to have that available, but also be more directive of what they've got to do, then the term services contract as well. The bills of quantity. So this is where there's the quantity of work varies, but you are directing them what work to do. Whereas the bills of quantities is where the contractor turns up on site and finds that there is more stuff to do or less stuff to do, if you like. That is NEC, any engineering construction contract option B. Or alternatively, for simple contracts, it could be a short contract, engineering construction short contract. Option A of NEC is activity schedules. That's where the contractor effectively takes the scope document, decomposes it into bars in a bar chart, divides those bars up into activities which aren't going to be of a longer duration than a month. And the reason they do that is because they only get paid when an activity is complete. This contrasts with lump sum contracts, where the contractor gets paid per proportion of a bar, if you like, complete. Option B of NEC is actually, although it's called bills of quantities, it's actually a lump sum and bills of quantities contract. Milestone payments aren't under NEC, they were under the old GC Works contract, and that's where the client specifies at very high levels what the contractor will be paid for when it will be paid when it achieves this. So activities, because they're based on the contractor's program, are normally derived by the contractor. Milestones, normally far fewer and derived by the client. Frameworks are for a period of time. They're for work of a similar nature, and they're a high-level contract or agreement for a period of time, out of which individual contracts or projects or sub-projects, shall we say, drop, and they are delivered under other members of the NEC family. We talked about target cost contracts and cost reimbursable contracts. So a cost reimbursable contract, the basis of reimbursement is cost plus a percentage fee, or defined cost where those costs are defined. And target cost contracts need a meaningful target prices in NEC speak to be agreed, and therefore the scope needs to be mature enough to say it's going to cost that. Okay. Project alliances are, so this is what the difference between a target cost contract and a project alliance is twofold. Under a target cost contract, there is pain gain share around the price, whereas a project alliance, it's more around the overall project budget. And therefore in project alliances, there are far fewer reasons to adjust it compared with the number of compensation events in a target cost contract. The other difference is that in a project alliance, it normally has the client and the key supply chain partners, the big people who can contribute to it, they are all in one arrangement, right? I'm saying this not absolutely true, but the ones we've covered so far. Okay, so it aligns the motivation of the parties, at least three, to the success more of the project rather than the success of the individual contract. Management contracting we've just talked about, and the last one is these, so build, own, operate transfers called BOOT. We didn't talk about those, but they're pretty darn similar to design, build, finance, operate. NEC has a design, build, operate contract. It leaves the financing out of it. You could either say stuff in the Z clauses, or you could just say, and you would say it in the Z clauses again, but very simply, we're not paying until you actually start operating it. Okay, so that's a really, really quick revision of what we have covered in terms of the content. Going back to the thinking process, reminder, there's an information phase, and just all decision making, all structured processes have an information and sense making phase, which you could say are these. So this is no different in my mind. We're going to choose the best fit contract strategy, which is which member of the family, which route, which is what we've talked about. And then we're going to start going down into the second tier options. Now this actually we've almost done. You could argue it should be up there, but I think you should look at this first if you were starting from scratch and saying which do we use. And we're going to be to some extent be looking at a little bit of this from now on as well. And quick reminder of those principles of risk allocation and sharing. Yes, we do consider who can manage it, with all things being equal, who can best influence it happening. But the primary one is what's the effect on the organization's business? And I gave you the example of why the hell do you insure your house against theft and burning down if you're the one who can best manage it. It's because it's a statistic. That's an extreme version of it, but you don't allocate a risk or a collection of risks to a party who will become insolvent or bankrupt. And we said clarity over above for minor, for especially frequently occurring risks, typically allocated to the contractor to avoid lots of arguments. And this is the logical stuff, but you can't get away from human aptitudes. So we're going to be looking at these, but we're not going to be looking at them necessarily in order, because what I'm doing is I'm grouping them together. So we're going to first of all look at the dispute avoidance clauses. We're then going to look at section bonuses and damages and things like that, and hopefully finish on limitation of liability today. And then we'll clear up the rest of it on next week. So dispute resolution options. So W1 is for adjudication outside the UK if no other legislation applies. So quick reminder, adjudication is a third party, an independent third party brought in to rapidly resolve disputes. Okay, that was the concept of the original authors, so that the parties to the contract could say, yeah, we might dispute it later, but we can move on. We've got a decision on which we can base the current decisions. Under this one, it says that you have to be able to you have to take a dispute to adjudication within a set time of the disputed decision arising. That does not comply with UK legislation, so W2 comes in. Before I move on to it, notice that bracket, if no other legislation. I don't know what the nationalities or where people are based, but Hong Kong has specific legislation. So does Ireland, so does New Zealand, so does Australia. I think Singapore certainly is planning to and might. So there is now specific legislation in many countries where NEC is used, which has, whatever is written as an independent resolver of disputes needs to comply with. Okay. In the UK, we've got W2. And the thing there is, it means that you can refer at any time. So it's not time barred from referring in a dispute to adjudication. NEC4 added in senior representative resolution. And if I was looking at this slide again, I put that senior representative in italics because they're an entry in the contract data as a option prior to commencing an adjudication. Now, why do I say highly recommended? The courts have done this where they have said to one party, you are the winner of the dispute. You are legally correct, but you have been such an awkward party, so unhelpful in trying to resolve this issue that I'm actually going to award all the costs against you, which at the courts level includes the party's cost of paying for lawyers, etc., and so on. At an adjudication level, you have to fund your own costs, if you like, but the adjudicator might say, even though you've won, all my costs are going to be against you. Right, because you've been such an awkward party and unhelpful. What you now have is a little dance between the parties where they try and make sure that they are seen to be and can document that they sought to try and resolve matters to avoid costs being awarded against them. So given that NEC4 has this senior representative provision where the senior representatives, and that should be in italics, but named in the contract data part 2, so one from the contract data, one from the contracting party, one from the client, they get together and they try and resolve the matter before it's referred to adjudicator. If you went straight to adjudication, but therefore, without doing that, you potentially would have costs awarded against you, the adjudicator's costs, and the adjudicator would probably be less sympathetic to your story. Okay. You have to go through in the UK. One of the reasons why legislation was introduced was to ensure that you go through adjudication before you go on to the tribunal. Again in italics, so stated in the contract data, which is specified either as arbitration or litigation. You can't go to the tribunal unless you've gone through adjudication. And the decision is enforceable unless until overturned by that tribunal. So if the adjudicator says, Mr. Client, you owe the contractor £100,000, you could think the adjudicator's completely got it wrong, but you still have to pay it. Okay? Unless and until overturned by adjudication or an agreement. What does adjudication look like? Well, I've got this slide, so I put it in. I'm not going to labour on it, but a dispute can be notified at any time. That's the key thing. And as I say, strongly suggested that the parties attempt to resolve it by senior representative meeting first. In italics, I've got there. You go to an adjudicator, a nominating body normally. So most professional institutions have an adjudication nominating body. They suggest an adjudicator from their list who has had a reasonably distinguished career, been trained up on an adjudication, and an adjudicator is reviewed. An adjudication they've conducted is reviewed typically every 2 years. The adjudicator, many who are semi-retired, might say, "I'm sorry, I'm in Bahamas at the moment," or "I'm busy," in which case you start again. Within 7 days, the notifying party has to supply all the documentation to it. And within 2 weeks, both parties can submit further information, or I should say 14 days. But the parties can agree an extension of not more than 14 days. The adjudicator has an additional 2 weeks from here to write up their decision, but they can agree to an extension suggested by the adjudicator of up to 14 days to write it up. However, what often happens is that it's or such longer period as is agreed by the parties after the dispute has been referred. And often my experience is that the adjudicator goes, "You two parties, you do agree to a longer time because this is kind of complicated." So I was on the edges of, I think it was the contractor wanted 46 million. Client thought it was around 13 million, and the adjudicator decided something like 26 million, I think it was, something like that. That's obviously quite a big dispute to decide in a month, yeah, and write up. So it took 3 or 4 months before the adjudicator gave their decision. Once the adjudicator has given that decision, they can correct a simple clerical or typographical mistake. So you were arguing this, or your logic went this, and then you said the client is at fault, and it seemed to be from the logic they weren't at fault. Oh, I missed out a not, yeah. Or a clerical mistake, you added the sums up incorrectly, something like that. But they can't fundamentally change it. They can't revisit it in the light of further information. And if a party wishes to take the dispute further, they have 4 weeks maximum to notify their intention. And short of going, "My God, we were completely wrong," why wouldn't you do that? Because if you don't do it, you're time barred. And there is case law on that. Not on NEC, I don't think, but from another contract with similar provisions, which says that time bar applies. Okay. Moving on to W3 is Dispute Avoidance Board, and it's for use outside of the UK if no other legislation. So what are disputes avoidance boards? Well, they were used at the Olympics, and what they are is effectively senior people. Well, actually, let's go through the slide because it's fairly representative of what they are. So under NEC, it's 1 or 3 members. So a smaller contract, 1 member perhaps. Bigger contract, 3 members. 1 party normally appointed by the client, 1 or suggested by the client, 1 party by the contractor, and an independent chair, if you like. In the contract, it says that they act impartially. It's anticipated they visit site regularly at intervals stated in the contract data to become aware of any potential disputes. So it's a dispute avoidance board. The idea is to avoid disputes. So with these regular visits, people with grey hairs, they're nudging the project. They're saying, we'll spot this. Have you thought about doing this? Whatever, yeah, to try and resolve the issue before it becomes major. Spot the first signs. But so assist the parties to avoid disputes in the legal sense, but may have a potential dispute referred to it, but can only make a recommendation. So people might say it's come to a head. We'd like your decision on it, but actually it's only a recommendation. Right? It's not enforceable, whatever they recommend. I've acted informally as a one on a project, almost as a project coach. Partnering coaches used to be all the rage. It was more an NEC coach. Originally it was to the project manager, but actually ended up being to the more the project team. So a bit of training, a bit of regular visits. Sometimes issues were referred to me. I remember having a day almost with 2 QSs where we tried to bang their heads together to resolve the defined cost requirements and so on. So, you know, very effective was my view on it. If we go back to the Olympics, there weren't any major disputes on the Olympics to my knowledge, in terms of court cases or anything like that. It would not take much to have it replace the senior representative process under W2. So instead of having I think you could, and I think it's a bit unfortunate. I'm not sure if that's the right word. It's a bit of an omission on major projects not to have something like this to try and head off disputes, to make recommendations, etc., before you start those formal dispute resolution processes, i.e. adjudication. So rather than having it as written instead of adjudication, you could have it prior to formal legal proceedings, prior to legal adjudication. So again, are any questions on the dispute avoidance clauses as you think about that? Anything you want cleared up? Oh, is there someone?
Is it fair to say that if you're in the UK, W2 is going to be the most commonly used?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's very. I see lawyers tweak W2, but they don't make any fundamental changes to W2, and that's because it's a good set of clauses. So I would be wary of a lawyer who deletes W2. Or I'd be wary of a contract where the lawyers deleted W2 and written their own, basically, right? Okay, because while there's quite a lot of case law on adjudication and the enforceability of it, there's not much. I'm trying to think if there's any cases on actually the words in the contract. I don't think there is. I might be wrong there. You know, it's a well-written clause. It's commonly accepted. It's almost if you're using NEC, it's the industry standard. Okay. Yeah. Any other question? Oh, if W3 is used for outside the three, why W3 was used for the 2012 Olympics? So W3 wasn't used, but they did have a dispute avoidance board. Okay, so they had the concept of a dispute avoidance board. You know, as I was saying, pre-adjudication, in between, they can't resolve things at site level, and you know, sitting there in between it to prevent disputes. But it was not W3, because W3 does not comply with the Act. Okay, and I'm not even sure if W3 was in existence in 2012, to be honest. I'm not even sure if they'd written it. I think it was written partly as a result of the success of the dispute avoidance boards at the Olympics. So, David, does that satisfy your question? Yes, good. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Oh, happy face as well. Right. Any other questions? No? Okay, let's carry on then. So we're going to look at the time-related incentives before we look at other incentives or incentive mechanisms. So first of all, we're going to look at key dates. So not a secondary option, all right, or a secondary X option. So what are the key dates? A key date or key dates are specified in contract data part 1 by the client. So it says, this is an important date for me. Here's the date, and it's in italics. But these key dates can be adjusted by compensation events, right, or are adjusted by compensation events. And when they become a key date. So the key date is the current key date. This is fixed because it's stated in the contract data. Something in italics can't change, but a key date there can be. And it can be an individual compensation event, as in the project manager just adjusts that key date. The contractor needs to achieve a condition, again in italics, so that's written in the contract data by a key date. All right, and if I press the next one, I think that what that looks like appears here. So there's the contract data entry, condition to be met, and here's the key date for it to be met by. All right. When the contractor has hit that condition, it's handed over to the client or an other contractor, right? And other is the term, any term for anybody else, yeah. And they get an undo stuff in that area, and then it's handed back to the original contractor. If it's handed over late by the contractor, then it pays a full cost, additional cost arising to the client and others, right? So let's say Christmas is coming up. Let's say I'm a contractor, I'm the original contractor, and a key date, big K, big D, in my contract is for 1st of December, where I have to give an area back to the client, who's then going to get an other contractor in to do 3 weeks of work before Christmas. The date on which it's got to be handed back is actually the first working day of the new year. The original contractor hands it over, let's say a week plus late. So the other contractor comes in and says, but I needed 3 weeks to do this. So the client says, can you work over the Christmas break? To which the other contractor goes, yes, but it will cost you because I'll have to pay double time, etc., to my guys to work over the Christmas break for the, right? And the client also goes, oh, and I'll have to pay some people extra double time to supervise them over the Christmas break. Those extra costs, and I stress the extra costs, are paid by the contractor, the original contractor, because they haven't met that key date. Okay. So that's what key dates are. Yeah, Charles.
Hi, John. So if I hear you correctly, the key date can be moved in the, like we have instances where like maybe you are affected by maybe the weather or something like that. Yeah,
they can be. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. The project manager can also give an instruct, and this is in NEC circles, NEC geek circles that I inhabit, a little bit controversially. The project manager can bring forward key dates, so that it could say, actually, I want to keep to that first. So that key date could have been put back by a compensation event to the 2nd week of December. And the project manager goes, actually, it's really important. I don't want to pay extra to the other. I'll pay extra to you. So I'm going to give you an instruction to bring forward that key date now, and I will pay it to you as a compensation event. Okay, the extra costs, which is obviously the contractor prefers. So time-related incentives, time 2, delay damages. So if you're other contracts call this liquidated damages, but NEC has low performance damages as well, which we'll come to. So it calls them delay damages. They're expressed on a per day basis if completion, so old speak practical completion, is after the completion date. So the contractual date on which the contractor has to achieve completion. So completion date is the contractual date on which they've got to achieve completion by, and if they're late, they pay delay damages per day. The completion date can be put back by compensation events. So damages should be set at not more than a genuine pre-estimate of likely loss. But, and this is a big but, and some lawyers in the room, if there's any lawyers, might disagree with me. A 2017 court case significantly expanded what can be included. And it almost said, we've got it wrong for the last 100 years, the courts, the Supreme Court. I'll come back to the question. All right. Reading that judgment, I thought some of the commentaries overstated it, where they were saying, oh, we've got it wrong, it completely redoes it. No, it still said they have to be a genuine pre-estimate, but what that pre-estimate can apply to, it's much, much bigger. So in our modern world, we rely intangibles, things you can't touch, if you like, have a value. So think of most of the software companies' value. It's not in physical stuff, it's in intellectual, the code they've written, if you like, yeah, and future earnings. So reputational damage, share price dipping because this big project is late, whatever it is, right, can all be thrown into a calculation of what those damages are. All right. Whereas the courts are so given that though, but the courts are very loath to overturn an amount set, especially between commercial organisations. So unfair contracts might apply to individuals, or the Consumer Protection Acts, etc., and so on. I'm trying to remember what they are because they've changed recently. Might apply if it was a consumer individual or company to an individual. But in commercial organisations, the courts will tend to assume that you knew what you were getting into. They will only overturn them. I think the words are if they're genuinely unconscionable or extravagant, right? And if the onus would be on the claimant, that, as in, I don't want to pay it, to demonstrate that. I'll finish this slide and then come back to the questions. But if you were to set them at that level, you have to consider the cost of risk transfer. As in, a contractor might look at that and go, Jesus, I can't afford that. I'm not bidding. Or they might say, actually, if you want those damages, I'm going to include a large risk premium in my prices. So effectively, you're paying for that risk, or to some extent for that risk, regardless of whether it occurs or not. So you have to consider the cost of risk transfer. Within framework, so contracts for a period of, or high-level contracts for a period of time with individual contracts dropping out, often they are set at minimal levels, £1 a day or something like that. And the reason they're set at there is that, oh, sorry, I'll come back to that. Well, no, I'll come back to that one there. Is if Sec 7 is not specified, damages are at large, i.e. whatever it costs the client. Now, first of all, given that 2017 court case especially, but even before, big argument about what the damage is, yeah, for late delivery. Big argument about who was responsible, etc., and so on. So it's far more preferable to have damages set in the contract for certainty. Both parties know what they're going to get, if you like, if the contractor is late. All right. But and from the contractor's point of view, it caps their liability per day. Okay. As I said, completion date is adjusted by compensation events, so damages remain valid if a client breach occurs. Without the completion date being adjusted, the contractor could say that completion date, I can't achieve it because you're a breach of contract, therefore damages are unenforceable. So that there has to be, for them to remain valid, there has to be a mechanism to adjust the completion date, and there is in NEC3. Okay, so 2 questions. So Cameron Dalziel says, is this only applicable from the completion date, or also can it be attached to another key date? Right, we'll come on to that with sectional completions. I'll answer that when we've done sectional completions. Zach, what's your question?
Hi there. Just about that point about like if there are delayed damages and the contractor decided to put more risk premium, is that reasonable practice? I mean, to have for contractor to say, well,
that will be in their prices, right? So, if everything goes swimmingly well, it'll cost me with a bit of profit £1 million, but you've got quite a tight contractual timescale to the completion date, and you've put damages of £10,000 a day on it. Yeah. I'm going to add in an extra £200,000 to my prices.
Right.
Think about it.
Is that acceptable practice? I mean,
absolutely.
Say the damage.
Absolutely. So if that's their offer, why that is their offer. Yeah.
Okay, you mean like nothing can stop them? This is their offer. This is their price.
It's if the client doesn't like it, they either don't go with that contractor, procurement rules accepting, right, or procurement rules accepting. You have a negotiation with them. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Okay. I'll come back to. Is it Oliver? Yeah. Yes. Could X7 be used on the professional services contract for a design-only contract where there is no planned date to commence any physical works? The answer is yes, but it would affect the level of damage, and I would encourage it, but it would affect the level of damages you put in there, because remember, they have to be a genuine pre-estimate still, but you'd be going, well, what's the consequence of them being late? All right. A bit of extra administration by the client, if you like. Yeah, so they need to be set at a comparatively lower level than if, as soon as you've finished it, I'm oiking it out for contractors to tender on it, and therefore it's on the critical path of the contract. Okay, that's Oliver. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So if you were going to sign up to a professional services contract that had X7 as a clause that was being used, you'd expect the contractor to define what the losses are that they'll incur?
No, they don't have to define them in the contract, but you would be wise to, right, in case there was a claim. Because going back to this, it's a genuine pre-estimate. So if people are going to challenge your pre-estimate, you need to have some basis for why you came up with that figure. Yeah.
And you have to prove that you came up with that figure before the contract was signed as well.
Yes, yeah. Prove is a strong word. Demonstrate that. But so it would be it would be sensible to make that calculation and put it in a filing cabinet or the project file to say this is how we came up with the damages.
Thank you.
Okay. I have been involved in big projects where contractors in the tender stages have asked for the how those damages have been arrived at. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. I'll move on to the next slide because I think it's relevant. The related clause in it is a sectional completion. So in pure civil engineering, in a pure civil engineering contract, a section would be a geographical area. All right. So let's say it's a bypass and there's 5 roundabouts, yeah, on it. There's 4 sections on it effectively to get working. and then for damages would reduce, or for each section could be in place. But it could be a state, so it could be on a process plant. You've completed the installation and commissioning, and therefore it's up and running to some extent. We as the client are getting some benefit from it. It's processing the material. Optimizing it is where you finished optimizing it, so it's running efficiently, if you like. Continuous run, it runs for 4 weeks without breaking down within the design parameters. Right? And then completion of the whole of the works being the supply of all the documents. Absolutely, now, closing out the contract effectively and all the little bits at the end. So what does that look like? If you've got X7 sectional completion, you've got the completion date for each section of the works is this. Okay, so a description and a completion date. Obviously, this would be expanded. In NEC4, they sort of digitized it, so this box expands to fill the space. And you want it to be clear cut. You've achieved that, yeah. Ideally, no argument about it. And the contract data entry for when X5 and X7 is used together. Well, this is for X7 delay damages. Well, if there's no X5 sectional completion, you just put in the delay damages for the whole of the works are there. If, on the other hand, you've got delay damages for the sections, you put them in there, and then the delay damages for the remainder of the works, the final bit, is there. And one of the things about NEC is it does allow you to specifically state what completion is. As in, you can say you've got to do absolutely everything to achieve completion. Or you can fall back on what the conditions of contract say, which is basically when the client can use the works. You've done enough for the client to use the work and others to come in and do their work. All right, that's the sort of fallback in the conditions of contract, or you can absolutely nail it in the scope, and that applies for these sections as well. Okay, so Cameron, is that X7? Is this only applicable from the completion date, or can it also be attached to another key date? Yes, right. A sectional completion. So Cameron, you're absolutely right to put key date with a small k and a small d, because if it was a key date with a big K and a big D, it would be this one, right? And that is where the contractor gets an area to a state and hands it over to an other to do work. Okay.
Yeah,
so
that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. I have to say, just before we leave this, a common amendment to key dates in the actual words is they put some damages in it, as in stated damages, because contractors look at this and go, I don't know, this is open-ended. Yeah, I could be liable for, I don't know how much I could be liable, but I think an awful lot. Yeah. So often an amendment is made so that if contractor doesn't meet a key date, there's stated damages per day. Okay, but in its unamended form, it's potentially open-ended, but it is limited to direct costs, not consequential costs. So moving on, we've done that. The opposite of damages, delay damages, is a bonus for early completion. So per day relative to the adjusted completion date. Mirrors X7, except you can specify whatever bonus amount you want. Now we're going to say more about bonuses and incentive design, but you obviously wouldn't specify an amount which is more than the benefit you're going to receive from an early completion. So there's the entry, and you can just see bonus for the whole of the works if it's only X5, and here bonuses for sections of the works. Then move on to performance related incentives. So this is for low performance damages. So I want a power station which produces X megawatts at Y% conversion. Yeah, rate, whether it's, let's say it was gas. Yeah, I think we haven't got coal anymore, but gas. Yeah, efficiency. It doesn't produce X megawatts. It produces X megawatts minus, I know, 2,000 megawatts minus, it should do, it produces 1,990. All right. For every megawatt below that contractual figure, I am going to make an estimate of my whole life cost, and therefore I will deduct that ultimately from what I pay you. Okay. There is and you can see the entry there and the performance level there in the contract data. There is no means of adjusting it. And that means that it's relatively easy for contractors to get out of it. So can give you a number of examples. I'll give you one from years ago. One of my sponsors when I did my research was National Power. They gave me an example where the contractor said, yes, we'll build you this cogeneration power station. So basically took energy from a factory facility, converted it into electricity. And then the engineer said, oh, actually, instead of the turbine, which you said you'd give us, could you have our favourite one instead? And the contractor said, yes, it'll cost a bit more, compensation for the additional more. But then it didn't actually deliver the power that it was wanted to, that it was stated in the performance spec. Low performance damages, client tried to apply, or employer, I should say. Contractor turned around and said, well, it would have achieved your performance specs, except you changed what we were going to deliver to this component. And that's the reason why it doesn't deliver it. And therefore they got out of it. I remember years ago, quite a few years ago, when I was at the start of helping MOD convert to NEC, and I keep quiet about that because the final result was an appalling contract. I was in at the front end, and they had for their term services contracts, if you like, service damages, where deductions if a service level wasn't reached. And I remember the sponsor there saying, you know, the number of times we deduct money because a service level hasn't been achieved, then we have 3 months of argument, and they demonstrate that we didn't actually do something. And that's the reason why, or why the contractor didn't achieve that performance level. Okay. So without a contractual means of adjusting it, if the client has done something to inhibit the level of performance being achieved, the contractor can get out of it, basically. So, okay. The opposite, though, is key performance indicators, KPIs. Can be added as the contract progresses, right? So you can add them in, and can be for results, as in at the end of the project. Yeah. So if we want 2,000 megawatts, but we want this efficiency, but for every percentage efficiency above that, that's worth £1,000 to us per unit. We'll encourage you by giving you £200 to do it, something like that. And there's an incentive schedule for the key performance indicator there. Okay. Now, going back to alliances, we talked about two forms of alliance. There's the alliance contract, the NEC4 alliance contract, and that's where everybody signs the same contract at the same time. And that's quite hard, getting all the lawyers to agree on that and getting all the scope to for all the players to a level of maturity where they can sign up to something. We talked briefly about an alliance agreement, which is where you have individual contracts with these people, but an alliance agreement sits on top of it and ties the fortunes of the parties to the success of the project through pay and gain mechanism. So there's individual contracts, but another agreement on top, which ties the fortune. The third form is the what I call a simple alliance or an X12 alliance. And in NEC4, it was renamed, it was with the partnering option. In NEC3, it was the partnering option. It's been renamed the multi-party collaboration option. And effectively, a set of X12 clauses are added onto the individual contract. So there's no overarching agreement which ties the fortunes of the players to the success of the overall project. Instead, there's an X12 clause added on here, here, and here. It covers a core group partnering information and KPIs, and only positive incentives can be set. And that's because people have to sign up to negative incentives or joint liability. But here you can say, if the overall project comes in below my budget of, say, £20 million for my water treatment centre, the civils contractor will get, I will pay you 25% of that. The M&E, the mechanical electrical, 25%, and the designer, 10%. Okay. And in doing that, what you're doing is you're creating a joint incentive for the parties to work together to save money on the overall project rather than necessarily on their individual contracts. So first of all, the nature of the collaboration is broader with the client, but it's also perhaps if the contractor comes up, the civils or a contractor comes up with a whiz-o-whiz way of doing it, the project better, the designer's not going to be going, oh, that's extra cost for me not doing it. They'll go, I might make some money out of this if it's a good enough suggestion. And likewise, at the interface between the civils and the M&E contractor, rather than fighting over it because they're only interested in saving money under their contract, they'll be making better decisions for the overall project. It's easiest alliance arrangement to put in place as there's only upside for the partners. So why wouldn't you sign up to it if you like, if there's only upside? So what does it look like in practice? So we've got the client, they've added on the X12 clauses to each individual contract. Otherwise, the same contracts as before, so you can have fit for purpose commercial arrangements like the second type. For any lawyers out there, I have to say this, no legal partnership is created. They probably add that in as words. You have a core group, which is like, and this again makes lawyers shudder, which is like a board for the project, board of directors, but for the project. They're senior people from the organisations. They're not involved in the day-to-day. Sufficiently involved to know what's going on, but they can be a bit remote. All right. So what do? They set direction, they monitor performance, and they're the last tier of non-contractual dispute resolution. So they're almost sort of overlap between a dispute avoidance board almost here, you could say, and they maintain the schedule of partners. The key performance indicators is an aspect of performance for which a target is stated in the schedule of partners, and it also says how much is paid if that target is met or improved upon. Only the client may add a KPI and associated payment and may not delete it. So they can't say, oh, this is looking good, I'm going to be paying out a fortune. Oh, I'll delete it. Once it's added in, it's there. There is partnering information, which is describes how the partners work together. It's going to be the similar or the same in all contracts, and it can be changed by a core group, but it is a compensation event. So they will get the extra if it is agreed that everybody will use the same software, programming software, and this contractor or has to go out and purchase licenses as a result, they would get extra money for that. That would come out of, if you like, the risk, the incentive pot. But so it's an it would be viewed as an investment. Doing this will save us money overall, or in net terms. And then there's some other provisions, a timetable, which is like a project program, so that people can see each other's contributions and when there might be clashes. And early warnings are given not just to the project manager, but to other people, the other partners as well. So I've got some concerns. I think my work is going to overrun, and that's going to affect you doing it. Okay. So the reason I've included it here is because it includes that key performance bit there with these other provisions here and some governance on top. And then there is X29, climate change requirements. So before we go on to these, can I just say, I really wish it wasn't called climate change, because it can apply to an awful lot of other stuff, right? And it can be applied instead of combining negative performance damages for missing targets, which could be time, and positive payments under X20. Whoops. You can use this instead. So how's it work? You have scope, and within the scope, you have climate change requirements. And I should say, why do I have mixed views on this? Because you can do absolutely everything which is in here already before this was published a couple of years ago. Okay. So in this contract, which I have here, which is the latest version, it doesn't have X29 because it's so new. It says just checking. All right. So I'm for, making sure addressing climate change issues, but it didn't need to be called this, and arguably it didn't need to be written because you could do it already. So you have the scope, but if you've got sustainability or what's the other, social value, this might be the one to use. Okay, social value requirements, in which case that could be social value requirements, right? So whatever they are, they're a subset or they're incorporated into the scope. All right, they're part of the scope documents. So why do you need us to call them something else? And the bidder might add in extra ones in terms of how they're going to meet it. So can include these things, and I'll let you just quickly glance through that. It can include other things, commercial aims, whatever. Because if it's like it's an empty vessel, the content is up to you. It's about the process of how you reward or not people. Going back to my previous point, do not place undue risk on the contractor with damages. Zach, yeah, I think it was you, yeah, okay, because they will either refuse to bid or they include a high premium in their prices. Non-compliance of a climate change requirement relating to works. What's delivered is a defect under the contract, as is if you don't deliver something in the scope, that's a defect, and then the contractor is required to correct it. But you can accept it, and if not corrected, the project manager can assess the cost of having that defect corrected. If, on the other hand, the contractor says, I will deliver these works and I will use environmentally friendly, low emission equipment to deliver it, that is about how they provide the works. That's not a defect, right? Or not considered a defect. But the project manager could say, you're doing work and it's not in accordance with the scope. I'm instructing you to stop. That arises from the fault of the contractor, and therefore there's no change to the prices, completion date or key dates. Okay. So Andrew Green has just put in what I remember. So are X20 and X12 clauses used together? No, I wouldn't. Not generally, right? I have used them on a very big program of projects, a 16.5 billion pound program, and we used X12 for things which were within an individual contractor's responsibility. All right, so where it's just this is within your control to deliver this, and we used X20 where there was risk interdependency, if you like. All right, so what's in the contract where it says not to be used with X12, X12 is not to be used with X20 and vice versa, I don't think that's quite right. Okay. Right, going back to this. Climate change requirements. Climate change partners are people or organisations who contribute to the achievement of climate change requirements and are identified in the climate change requirements, which are in the scope. The contractor collaborates with them, as stated in the climate change requirements. So if there's nothing stated about how they collaborate, the way that's written, I'd say they didn't have to. The climate change plan shows how the contractor plans to meet the climate change requirements. It has to comply with the climate change requirements. And that talks about disclosure. The climate change plan shows how the plan, we've talked about that one. So it can be either submitted by the bidder and pointed to from the contract data, or or submitted within the period stated in the contract data. So either the climate change plan can either be developed before the contract or developed within a set timescale once the contract's signed. It's revised when the project manager instructs or the contractor chooses, and the project manager has 2 weeks to accept it and states reasons if not going to accept it. And there'll be 2 contractual reasons. One is it doesn't comply with the climate change requirements, and the other one is it doesn't contain sufficient information, which is a general risk under NEC. Revising it if the project manager instructs is not a compensation event, and it really should be a light touch in terms of looking at. There is a performance table, and again, this is where it sort of captures in one table both the low performance damages and the KPIs. So you've got the subject, you've got the target units. You'll probably need some measurement rules, and the units there. All right. The trick is to make sure the units match, are easy to measure, but at the same time match what your objective is. Get that wrong, and it's not going to work. Basically, date when the performance is to be measured. What happens to the amount paid by the contractor if the performance does not meet the requirement? And unlike the other options, it does limit the amount paid. So there is an entry to say the maximum you can pay is. And that's quite important for contractors when bidding, because they really do like to know their liabilities. On the other side, it says the amounts to be paid and limits on the amount paid, and the reporting frequency. So is it weekly, monthly, or whatever? So that's where if it's for an end result, you're saying, are we on course, if you like? I think that targets could be set by the client or offered by the bidder and possibly included in the tender evaluation. So how much are you prepared to put on the line? Are you serious about this? Right, okay, so I think we've covered this. Yeah, information in the performance table is not scope, so you need to make sure that it matches up to the scope. And if secondary option X18 applies, an excluded matter is amounts payable by the contractor as stated in the performance table. What does that mean? That's where I'm going to do briefly limitation of liability, and then I think we'll have to finish there, which means that we won't have covered incentive plan design, so 2 slides only. So X18 is limitation of liability. So if the contractor mucks up in some way, or the consultant mucks up in some way, this caps their liability. In other words, I can sue you for up to this amount, but I can't sue you for more. All right. And this is important stuff. So I remember giving training to the contractors, potential contractors, the preferred contractors board of a German company. It was a 200 million euro company, and they were the preferred contractor for this 200 million euro remediation project. And I talked about the NEC and how wonderful it was. But what they were concerned were things like this. If this contract goes down, is it going to take my 150-year-old family company down? Yeah. Okay. And they set red lines, which was go back to the client and tell them, unless they change this to this, we're walking away. All right. So in a competitive situation, you need to suss out the market and find out what their risk tolerance is, because otherwise, going back to Zach's, the point I made with Zach, you're either going to have no contractors or very few contractors bidding, or there's going to be big premiums in there. Okay, so there's limitations of liability. There's a direct limit on indirect or consequential loss. So that is I'm doing work on your factory. I accidentally burned the factory down. The indirect or consequential loss is loss of revenue, for instance, loss of profit because I've burnt down partly or wholly your factory. There's a direct cap on that. There's also a direct cap on the client's property. So the cost of rebuilding your factory. So, okay. There's also a direct cap on the defects due to the design. So we will come back to this, but the level of liability for design is the consultant contractor has to exercise reasonable skill and care. I'm going to gloss over that, forgive me. Whereas the contractor for workmanship and materials has to exercise a fitness for purpose. All right, so this would relate to the design liabilities. There's a direct cap on that. And then there's other. Well, there is no cap on these things, but these are bundled together into a total liability. So let's say the indirect cap or consequential loss cap was 10 million. The defects due to design, the real was 10 million, and this we don't know until the contract was signed. So 10 and 10, but the overall total liability was 15 million. Let's say it went really, really wrong. It burned down, the client lost 20 million pounds. They were partly due to design, key dates weren't met. The client's costs, if you like, under these three things were 25 million, but the total liability was 15, the contractor would only be liable for 15 million for these three things. However, you've got these excluded liabilities or excluded matters. So excluded from this total liability, so it's not really a total liability, is damage to the client's property, delay damages, which we've talked about, low performance damages, which we've talked about, under a target cost contract share of any pain, and payments under X28, which is why I put it here to remind us, under the climate change option. Okay. So when it talks about total liability, the main point is it's not really the total liability. You've got these things here. The one other point I'd mention is for anybody working for contractors or consultants is you want your insurances to match the liabilities in the contracts. All right. So my insurance liability for not exercising reasonable skill and care as an individual consultant or company is 1 million. I refuse to contract on any contract where the company's liability is, which would be this one, effectively, professional indemnity, is more than 1 million, because the company, not me, but the company would have to pay out the extra bit, the over and above the 1 million. Okay. And people come to me and say, big consultants say, but ours is 5 million. That's our standard for our consultants. I go, well, you've either got to pay me before I do any work to take out the extra insurance, or you need to reduce your standard in your contract, and they normally do. Okay. So with that, I will, let's see, I will just about finish off. We'll do these next week. And I'll just put up, and I just hope from those things there, you can see it's brought these principles of risk allocation and sharing alive a little bit. Got one last question from Zach. And any other questions for anybody else? So Zach?
Apologies, I asked too many questions, but it's very interesting, and thank you for presenting it. Just about that last point, which payments are X28? This X28 is for the change of control, right?
X28, this is what I mean by X28 is an empty vessel, in that it's up to the client and possibly the contractor to put in what their targets are, what their objectives are, what their targets are, what the amount of payments are, either way, so on. And that's why I think it's a shame that it's called a climate change option, because it could be for anything. So it could be relating to one of the questions I got, how do we do social value? Well, it could be for social value objectives,
But is that X28 or is it X29 for climate change?
I'm pretty sure. So it's X28. Oh, is it X29? Oh, no, I got it wrong. It's X29. Sorry, I've got that wrong. Yeah, X29. Okay. Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Cheers.
All right. X27 and X28 are actually in the facilities management contract. So because I don't have that, I haven't talked about them. Okay. Okay, people are starting to leave. It's a fraction after 6 o'clock. As some of you did, feel free to drop me a line. And if you've got any questions, and we'll cover them as a bit of a revision last time. And just going back to what I said about X29 is an empty vessel. The words are there for you to put in whatever you like, but you need to put them in intelligently. And that's what we'll address next time, first time round. Okay, right. Cheers, everybody.